Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm Newman Brayfield Griffiths, Senior Policy Advisor, DCBS DFR. This is our revived Rulemaking Advisory Committee related to House Bill 4149 from 2024. The primary purpose is to go over some changes that we are making in advance of filing for a final rule. Let's see here. Where the heck did I put my agenda? I see Karen's agenda. There it is. Yes. So we have a few things to go over. There's a couple of changes that we're making relative to the temp rule that was filed in December. So I'm kind of going to go over the rationale for those. We also need to discuss our statement of need and fiscal impact with the RAC group before moving forward. We have time available for public comment. These meetings are subject to public meetings law, and then we'll kind of go over next steps. Just to kind of try and keep time moving, I'm just gonna note the membership. Lugina Mendez-Harper, representing Prime Therapeutics, which is a PBM. Maris Alden, representing Cambia Health, which is an insurance carrier in the state. Jen Baker, representing Express Scripts and Cigna, which is both PBM and a carrier in the state. Lauren Sant with Caring Ambassadors, who's a consumer advocate. Madonna McGuire-Smith with Pacific Northwest Bleeding Disorders, who is a consumer advocate. John Murray, who is an independent pharmacy owner with Murray Drugs. I guess I don't have Austin, do I? I'm not quite full. Also participating in the RAC in the fall was Austin Blakesley, who is not currently present with High School Pharmacy. And finally, Amy Burns with All Care CCO, representing sort of institutional pharmacy. And Amanda Meeker, who is with the Oregon State Pharmacy Association, which is a pharmacy, a trade group representing pharmacies. Okay, and got a few more interested parties joining in. I'll check on an off chance that the phone number is if the phone number is Austin, but otherwise, like, if we needed a quorum, we would have it. Okay.
Hey, Numi.
Yes.
If we could have that person identify themselves with the phone number 6078.
If the person on the phone could please identify themselves. Well,
pardon me, this is Nancy Nesplin from Cambia.
Oh,
perfect.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I am going to share my screen in a moment here. If I could. So the red line rule that I provided is showing changes relative to the current rule that is in place for the permanent rule. So the rule that is in effect for purposes of the filing is the previous rule that was adopted with revisions, I think, back in 2020 or something like that. So Jesse was leading that RAC. So if you look at the red line, it doesn't reflect just changes from the temp rule that we filed in December. It reflects changes relative to what is technically the current final rule. So that makes it a little bit annoying to read, perhaps. And also because, like, the primary thing I want to focus on today is the changes that we're making relative to the temp rule, at least one of which I think our friends at the PBMs and carriers will be happy about. But these are fairly nitty-gritty technical things. And so I'm gonna share using using the clean copy instead of the let me do screen. Okie dokie. So there's really only a couple changes that I wanted to address here. So let's see. So the first one is related to the transparency reporting provisions of the bill, which were adding was adding a reporting related to spread pricing, and the language in the statute was actually referring to spread pricing, pay per performance, or other similar means. The way that this played out, you might remember in the fall, the conclusion we kind of landed on was that anything that would fall under this would probably just mean spread pricing, as it was defined in the statute, because spread pricing was described as being spread pricing was described as in statute as being the difference between what a carrier pays a PBM for a particular transaction and what the PBM pays the pharmacy, so the spread that is retained by the PBM. And we had kind of consensus around November that the way that we would approach this is basically just by defining the whole list of things as being, well, okay, spread pricing, pay per performance, or other similar means for purpose of this report just means that spread pricing is defined in the statute. After some consultation, we were our council concluded that it would not be kosher to define something that is a broader category by reference to something that looks like a narrower category that is specifically defined in statute, if that makes sense. So what we've tried to do here is craft language that kind of gets to the same result without running afoul sort of that statutory logic. So what we have down here is kind of this definition under sub G, total amount of revenue received by PBM through spread pricing, pay per performance, or similar means, which includes the following. So difference between reimbursement to pharmacy and what the pharmacy was reimbursed by carriers for the same for prescriptions, and then any revenue obtained by the pharmacy benefit manager through spread pricing as defined. So it's kind of weird and circular, but the ultimate result is the same, as that for that category, we're just looking for reporting on kind of that bulk difference without making a specific effort to try and run down this idea of pay per performance in this particular space that it's being asked about. So that is one change. John, go ahead.
Where it talks, thank you, Nimi. Where it talks about the total amount of the pharmacy benefit manager was reimbursed by carriers for prescriptions dispensed by pharmacies in Oregon. What if these pharmacies, like a PBM pharmacy, is outside of Oregon? Would it fall outside of this definition? Say it's based in California, but they mail the prescriptions to Oregon. I don't know that that's true, but if it is, would those be excluded by this definition?
I think if a pharmacy is maybe it should be pharmacies licensed in Oregon or something along those lines to kind of take account for it, because even an out-of-state pharmacy would need to be licensed with the Board of Pharmacy in order to dispense. So maybe that's a clarification I can make. So I will put a note for myself. Add comment. Licensed in Oregon. And I apologize that, like, no matter how many rule sets creating new licensure programs I do, I still cannot spell the word license consistently. So any other comments on this? Do our carrier friends have issues or Amanda, did you have something you wanted to throw on the table?
Oh, I had a different topic, so I thought, are you wrapping this one up? The licensed in Oregon?
Anything from our friends at the carriers and PBMs on this? Any issue with either the base definition or adding this language saying dispensed by pharmacies licensed in Oregon? And I'll make sure. Okay, Amanda, why don't you go ahead? And like one thing I want to say before you take the floor, and I think I tried to say this earlier, but like I really want to keep the conversation focused to the changes that we're making to the rule relative to the temp rule, rather than reopening dialogue on anything that is kind of outside of those three changes. So what was your comment addressed to, Amanda?
My comment was going to say that this doesn't actually, so I think you're missing the pay for performance if they're going to take money back or not pay pharmacies in an aggregate form for pay for performance contracting when they do that at the PSAO level. So I think that's missing from your examples.
Yeah, I mean, I think we went around a lot in the fall about where I solicited the group for a definition for pay for performance that got at what this is really trying to get at, and nobody produced anything. So like, I know that there's concerns out there, and there's concerns about sort of chargebacks based on incentive reductions to payments, but you know, without a clear definition, I can't really put something in rule that we can enforce. Like, so I appreciate that comment. Like, I don't think this will be the final time we revisit rules on PBMs in Oregon. If some version of the bill that's under consideration this year passes, it's possible that we'll even reopen this rule this year. So if you have an interest in kind of running down a way to actually nail down what those transparency provisions are getting at beyond what I was able to draft here, then like I am all ears. But without hearing anything, like kind of the best alternative is to kind of go with the guidance that we have, with the knowledge that with better information we could expand that in the future. And if we reopen this rule for other reasons, like maybe we would have more insight based on the collection of data on what this is really trying to get to. Legina, go ahead.
I just had a quick question, just a process question. Yeah. I know you had said you wanted to talk through the changes today and not really have a lot of discussion. If we have feedback, once we have a little bit more time to look at these, do we have an opportunity to provide that in writing, or what process do you want us to follow?
No, absolutely.
Okay.
If you can get me any thoughts on the draft in the next, let's say week, but basically by next Friday, I think would be, so not, Karen, do you have a thought on that timeline wise?
Well, yeah, we're running out of time.
Yeah, no, I know.
You know. Let me think here. I gotta look at the calendar.
And this can be a question for the end. You don't have to answer this now. I just wanted to clarify, like, what process you want us to follow. And then we'll go from there.
No, totally. And, you know, I know that there's folks who might need to phone the mothership before giving comments. So like that's regular process. But like, yeah, I think my intent certainly would be to let it go at least out to next Tuesday for folks to give something back. I'd prefer probably next Friday, because that's where the lull in my work week is for taking care of things that are not involved with the legislature most of the time. But Karen, do you think that would work next Friday or next Tuesday?
Tuesday at the latest.
Okay.
Just because of our internal routing process is about a week and a half to 2 weeks. So Now, there is opportunity also for public comment once we file the notice
Mhm.
of proposed rulemaking. So there's that entire month to provide public comment as well. So, but I know we want to nail this down,
Yeah,
the language. So,
okay.
all right.
Okay. So other changes, I have two more, one of which is fairly substantive and one of which is related to other transparency provisions. So this relates to kind of something that we talked a lot about last fall, which was the mail order language and the specialty pharmacy language. And so like I want to be really transparent about how this shook out, why we are making this change relative to the temporary rule right now. And so as you might recall, my initial draft took the approach of saying that the mandatory mail order is banned, specialty pharmacy is allowed. The mail order language, the specialty pharmacy language was not in my read of the statute, did not appear to be an exception to the mail order language. So that's kind of was my chain of logic in looking at the plain language of the statute. When we talked about this, Lugina brought up the concern that so the specialty pharmacy language was meant to operate as an exception to the mail order provisions. I don't have a problem with that. The department doesn't have a problem with that. We are agnostic on the policy here, with the sort of acknowledgement, that with specialty pharmacy, there are, in some cases, limited choices for dispensing particular drugs, that there may be only a single pharmacy in the country that is probably not in Oregon that dispenses a particular drug. So with the sort of knowledge that we don't really care about the result of the policy here, I went in looking to try and see if I could get something that satisfied the expectations of stakeholders into the rule, and got advice from DOJ that the plain language of the statute would not permit interpretation of the specialty pharmacy language operating as mail order. And so that's what got us into kind of all the back and forth that we had just between December and February, talk about potentially amending the statute to allow that. And where in our communication with the carriers and PBMs, we basically said, okay, like we're going to get a public facing legal opinion from DOJ that says this interpretation is not permitted by the plain text of the law as it stands. And the hope was that we would have that public facing opinion available at the same time that, or before we filed the final rule, that had that sort of exception operation into the language. We were basically all ready to file our final rule at the end of last month. So we would have been having, our public hearing on the final rule next week, actually, I think, which is no longer on the calendar. And we got notified by DOJ that after internal consultation, they concluded that the plain reading of the statute was the opposite of what we had been initially advised, and that the appropriate way to read the statute was to say that the specialty drug language does operate as an exception to the requirement that you not have mandatory mail order, which is the thing that the carriers and the PBMs have been asking for. So I have deleted the exception language from, what is it? Where is it? It is subsection 2 of this bill, of this rule, which says, you know, the modified language said, except as provided in subsection 6 and 7. I've deleted the and 7 and I've reverted it back to subsection singular. So that is referring to the existing statutory exception for long-term care pharmacies and the exception for mail order, mandatory mail order no longer is in the rule. Yes. So that's basically where we're at. So to clarify, the rule is as it would be written after this is filed, kind of reverts back to the status quo rule. But the legal interpretation of the effect of that is that you cannot require mandatory mail order. You can require use of specialty pharmacy, and the specialty pharmacy language operates as an exception to the mandatory mail order provisions of the statute. So that's where that is, and this is basically reverting that language back to status quo in the rule. Does anybody have comments, questions, or concerns? Yeah, John, go ahead.
So does this rule say that the PBM can designate which specialty pharmacy or not? Is it any specialty pharmacy that qualifies as a licensed specialty pharmacy? Or
Yes.
does it have to be just the one they pick?
No, it would not permit that. It is kind of going back to the language that was negotiated around the previous PBM bill, I think 2185 from 2019. So it is, you know, you can require the use of a specialty pharmacy, but you can't require the use of a particular specialty pharmacy as defined in the rule. And then there's all the stuff about the specialty drugs, which are subject to that, which I didn't touch that portion of the rule relative to what was adopted in 2020.
Sure. So the patient would be able to ask, or if they have a preference on a specialty pharmacy, according to these proposed rules, they could request it in place of one that maybe the PBM is wanting them to, or suggesting that they use, or saying they require them to use.
I believe that is correct. I would have to think about that harder and longer to say yes for certain, but I think that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Legina, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank you for giving us the history of everything that went on and for getting us back where we were. And John, just to answer your question, I don't think that the PBM would necessarily say like you must use X specialty pharmacy, but you would have to be in our specialty network. So does that help kind of answer what concern you had?
Yeah. Like for example, if OHSU had a specialty pharmacy that wanted to supply the medication, they just need to be credentialed with the PBM. Is that what you're saying, Regina?
They would have to be, yeah, they would have to be part of our specialty pharmacy network.
Okay, which
I
pharmacy
mean, I was just going to say the only time that we would say like you have to go to a certain pharmacy would be those limited distribution drugs where like, let's say you can only get it at CVS specialty. Then we would say, you know, and it's not us that's saying you have to go there. It's the FDA and the manufacturer have set those limitations. So I think that's my understanding is that we would, you know, you would still have different pharmacies in the network.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I want to approach this with total transparency because, like, we don't want to give the impression that we're taking hard policy stances arbitrarily. This is very much something that was informed by our consultation, and you know, it's not the ideal way I would have liked to have had things played out. I would have liked to have landed the plane in December and be able to file a final rule that's effectively unchanged from whatever I landed on in December. You know, that's not the universe that we live in, for better or worse. But Lauren, go ahead.
So thanks. I'm just curious. So do the PBMs and the insurance industry still get to define which drugs are specialty drugs?
Well, for the most part, we do have language in statute and in rule here, which kind of defines the qualifications of what can be considered a specialty drug. Like, we didn't reopen that section of the rule here, but where it is, saying if according to standard industry practice requires specialized preparation, administration, handling, storage associated with difficult or unusual data collection or administrative requirements, requires pharmacists to manage the use by drug monitoring, et cetera, and also has the definitions for how pharmacy may demonstrate that it meets the definition of specialty pharmacy under the law by showing these things. So that's kind of where it is right now. We haven't dealt with any challenges kind of to specialty designations under this rule. Like, that's not something that we've explored. If there was a complaint that came forward either from a consumer or from a pharmacy that is saying, hey, this carrier X is defining aspirin as a specialty drug requiring a specialty pharmacy and network, send us a complaint about that, and then maybe we would run this down and say it's like, hey, no, you're not meeting that. And while we have received complaints from pharmacies about a variety of concerns related to the PBM statute, that's not one of them. So yes, it is largely in the carriers and the PBM's hands as to what they consider a specialty drug or not. But if they're doing things in a way that is inconsistent with current law, that would be something that is potentially subject to challenge. And we could potentially enforce on if there are unreasonable decisions made beyond the scope of what's in rule here.
Thank you. I can think of one that automatically qualifies, but we'll take that up with you offline. Thank you.
I'll look forward to seeing your complaint. Well, I won't, but my colleagues will. Okay, so that is that, and certainly this language has ended up being more of a saga than I wanted it to be, but we are at least in a position to hopefully file a final rule in 2 weeks. That will not satisfy everybody, but will at least address the issues that were raised last fall. Okay, so I've got one more change. And so this is actually related to a rule that we did not discuss in the RAC back in last fall, back in 2024. So this is somewhat ancillarily related, since we did have a RAC already convened that is relating to transparency provisions, prescription drugs, et cetera, and has carriers and pharmacies and advocates in it. We were informed that we needed to make this change, so we are wrapping it into our existing rulemaking on PBMs. So what this relates to is a different portion of the drug price transparency program. So not to PBM specifically, but to insurer reporting. And so Senate Bill 192 from 2023, it made some changes to ensure the insurer reporting requirements, specifically pushing it out where previously it was part of our annual rate review process. So it applied to plans that were in a small group or in the individual markets only. And it said basically expanded it to all health benefit plans. So the whole universe of state regulated insurance, which is a big expansion. So it's like pushing out to all the large group fully insured plans that are out there. When we were writing the rules around this, there was feedback that came from our program team that they would like some way to limit things, because there are things that qualify as health benefit plans that affect very small numbers of people. And that might be a fully insured group, say that for a national organization that only has 75 employees in Oregon, as an example. And where we wanted to kind of, as always with things where we're collecting data about health information, we want to avoid collecting information that is potentially personally identifiable, even if we're not publishing that, where we're avoiding collection. So we want to avoid collection of very, very small numbers, as well as to reduce the administrative burden on the team. Because right now, DPT, Drug Price Transparency, has, I believe, 3 employees. Which, like, as part of the larger sort of PDAB, the drug pricing unit, they have like 6 or 7 employees, but like that's not enough to kind of get to the thing of potentially the administrative burden of collecting data from every single thing that offers something that could be considered a health benefit plan under the law. So the way that we did this in the rulemaking for 192 is we placed a limit of 200 or more enrollees in the state of Oregon. To basically say, and so what that was capturing is it was capturing the smallest insurer that was previously subject to the requirement. And like, yes, it's a somewhat arbitrary number. Something that I was actually not aware of prior to this challenge is that the Office of Legislative Counsel, which is a subdivision of the legislative staff, actually reviews all of the rules that all of the agencies put out and reviews them for consistency against what the statute says. During the review of these rules adopted to implement Senate Bill 192, we were notified by the Legislative Counsel office that there was not proper basis to support this limitation on the number of enrollees. So that basically saying the statute says all health benefit plans, it means all health benefit plans. We tried to talk to them about some different alternative ways to redraft this in a way that would permit us to continue to exercise our prosecutorial enforcement discretion to not pursue, say, an insurer that has 1 beneficiary in Oregon, and all of those were rejected. So in order to preserve the rule, we are amending it to delete that language. I would say that we still retain discretion as a regulatory agency to not go chasing down every rabbit that is out there. That this is still to say that, like, I don't think we really want to go out of our way to collect data from health benefit plans with fewer than 200 enrollees in the state. But apparently it cannot be in the rule. So for people who are active in the legislative process, maybe that is something you would like to consider writing into the statute in the future, but that's not what it says right now. Any comments, questions, discussion on this item? Okay, cool. I see a shaking head from John, and Lugina hasn't said anything, so I think we're probably okay. Okay, so I've got, let me stop sharing for a second so I can, well, no, actually, let me just switch windows. So I did also share out a draft statement of need and fiscal impact that was distributed out to the group. I don't know that we need to go through this in super detail. There aren't a lot of changes to this relative to what I discussed with the group, I think, on December 11th. There's kind of mentioning the LC change. So that paragraph is new. And then basically saying in May, we convened the RAC again to talk about this. Most of the rest of this, I think, is not changed. That saying that this primarily regulates PBMs, insurers. They're not small businesses under the law, so there's not an impact on small businesses that we're anticipating, other than any ancillary effects related to sort of small businesses that are pharmacies. But they're not, pharmacies are not directly regulated by this rule, so it's not a burden thing. Talking about record keeping burdens. This expands reporting somewhat, but like we don't think it's a huge burden. It's a small amount of data we're collecting. We don't think there's a huge amount of necessary resources. So we think it's a minimal cost for PBMs and insurers to report. We did have small businesses in the RAC. We did convene a RAC. The membership includes all the stakeholders that we expect would be affected. And then there's basically my summary of all the changes that are being made. So I know that's a lot of material. If you want to take the time to read things in more detail and get me comments by next Tuesday, that would be appreciated. But any thoughts off the top of folks' heads, just to start with? Okay, I see both John and Lugina shaking their heads. So I think we're probably good then. Okay, great. Agenda. So we do have, this is a public meeting. We have time reserved for public comment. I do recognize that I managed to get through the formal agenda 10 minutes faster than I estimated. So we are early, but I don't think anybody is going to jump on probably. But if somebody does join in the last 10 minutes, I will reopen public comment. Is there any member of the public who is not an official RAC member who would like to comment on the rules discussion or the statement of need and fiscal impact? Please raise your hand or speak up. Hearing none. Okay, let's move on to next steps. So as we discussed, I will accept written comments back because we are on a tight timeline and we need to both get through our internal review process and then file so that we are ready for this to go out in the bulletin for June, on June 1st. Please get those back to me by next Tuesday if you have any detailed feedback. I am planning to make the one change that we discussed, which was related to the in Oregon, so saying pharmacy licensed in Oregon. So one note, so procedurally, this is a little unusual because our temporary rule expires at the end of June. And we don't necessarily expect this to be in effect at the end of that period of time. So we will, with this filing, so we'll have public hearing in June, and then we will be ready to finalize kind of after the comment period. But that means that the rule will become effective at the beginning of August. Is that right? August, yes. So technically, that means the temp rule expires and we don't have a revised permanent rule in place for 1 month, which is not ideal. Again, like this sort of timeline was changed by, I wanted to file at the beginning of this month, but this was hindered by the fact that some of our legal guidance on this particular issue was reversed 4 days before we were going to file the rule. So this is not ideal. It is what it is. What does that mean procedurally? So procedurally, that means that the final rule that is in effect as of the expiration at the end of June, and so through all of July, is the current permanent rule as established in the rulemaking from House Bill 2185 So the rulemaking that occurred in 2020. I don't think that there is a lot of harm to that, because most of the changes that are in this rule were, for all the sound and fury, most of the changes that are made relative from the current rule to this revised rule are replacing things that say registration with things that say licensure. The other things that are in here are, why don't I just stop sharing, actually? So, or not, or I'm just losing my window. Okay, great. Come on. There we go. The remainder of the changes I would characterize as interpretation of existing law. So like, to the extent that like I've made changes to the market conduct rule, it's kind of been trying to wrap in things that have been passed in statute since the adoption of the rule in 2020, or kind of just trying to clarify language that existed before. Like, I expanded a lot of the verbiage around MAC appeals to try and get to something that is a little bit more functional and fully achieves the kind of goals of the law as it currently exists, which is to say that, you know, you can't deny MAC by providing a drug that is not generally available for purchase, and trying to kind of really land that and make sure that our existing appeal process is working under the assumption that there will not be substantial changes to that system based on the actions of the legislature this year, which seems unlikely at this point. And then the other sort of more substantive things are related to transparency. The temp rule will be in effect when we are collecting our PBM reports. So like, okay, yes, the rule will expire during the period of time when we will be processing the data that has been reported by PBMs, but since we'll have already received the reports, and I think the statute is clear enough on its face, I don't think that there is ultimately going to be harm to any parties as a result of this. So we will have the sort of approved final rule effective in August, which is great. And then we'll see if anything passes that requires us to bring you all back together, or if you're tired of talking about PBMs, possibly other folks who might be interested to chat about PBMs next fall, if there is a bill that passes this year that requires additional rule changes. Any questions? All right. Wow, under an hour. I'm so super excited. Thank you all for joining on short notice. If you have written comments, please get them to me by 1 week from now. So let's say 11 a.m. next Tuesday. And thank you all for your help in getting through this. And we will look forward possibly to seeing you at the public hearing next month, or not. It's okay. I'll look forward to seeing written comments from anybody who has feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Numi. Well done.
Thanks, Numi.